The brain waves developed from the monotony of the anxiety to the richness and beauty of words, thoughts, and feelings played by the brain with its electromagnetic string, and it was not an easy process. It took even tens of millions of years for the brain to master the extremely difficult art of such electromagnetic wave emission by the brain box, so that the resulting brain waves were a precise marking of words, feelings, thoughts, and executive projects. The electroencephalography expert would like maybe to instruct me at this point that the animal and the human EEGs are almost the same. I will answer him anecdotically. If an extraterrestrial had found a notebook of a teenager with the notes on the history of the mathematics, on the history or on the mathematics, and he found also a notebook of a diligent 3-year-old who likes to draw lines and fancy signs line by line, probably both entries would be considered by this alien to be graphic records of the human speech. Of course, this alien would be wrong. It's similar with the human and the animal EEGs. It's clear that the animal brain, like the human brain, is a source of the electromagnetic waves that can be recorded by the electroencephalography devices. But a difference between them is the same, like a difference between the notebooks of a 3-year-old and of a 15-year-old. In the first notebook, the patterns are just patterns and more or less fancy signs and nothing more. In the case of a 15-year-old, we have similar signs to the untrained eye, but these signs already carry a meaning and a content. The time will come, if it has not already come, when we can decode electromagnetic waves just as we once deciphered the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and we will read the EEG like a book. Animal electroencephalography makes no sense other than the recording of the electromagnetic waves emitted by an electromagnetically active brain, because the living brain of an animal emits electromagnetic waves for an infinite number of reasons, except one. It cannot emit such an electromagnetic wave which could encode a meaning of a word or any other primary symbol. Only human brain can emit electromagnetic waves in such a way. Probably many people will be interested in the question why the human brain emits the electromagnetic waves in addition to the neurophysiological circumstances, also in order to encode concepts and symbols, and the animal brain emits electromagnetic waves, but only as a result of the neurophysiological brain activity which has no symbolic meaning. The answer is anxiety. The man would never appear with the mission of the brain waves. The man would never appear with the emission of the brain waves encoding words, thoughts, all primary symbols, were it not for the primal electromagnetic brain emission of the prehuman apes that took since then over the whole brain for all times and lasts constantly during wakefulness, fading only during sleep. It was the first melodic line, simple and monotonous, which gave rise to the infinitely rich melody of the human thinking. Now it was enough to consciously form this line to let it become an electromagnetic sculpture of an infinite number of symbolic concepts. Contrary to the beliefs existing in the neuroscience, these symbolic concepts are not stored in any cellular structures, any proteins in the neurons. These concepts are shaped in the electromagnetic sense, just as the mouth, larynx, and tongue are able to vibrate a sound wave that takes the sound shape of a word, an infinite number of words. The brain is able to emit the waves, this time not sonically, but electromagnetically, carrying an infinite number of symbolic concepts. Of course, it's extremely interesting to ask how the human brain came up with an idea that no other animal in the nature came up with to make out of the electromagnetic emission of the brain, so far being a barely chaotic echo of the physiological processes of an infinity of neurons, to make out of this a harmonious chorus singing electromagnetic waves that have strictly coding meaning. And I know how it happened because what happened tens of millions of years ago is still happening today, and we can observe and describe it closely. This moment, when the brain as a whole is used for the first time to generate an electromagnetic wave carrying an encoded symbolic meaning, is experienced by almost every human being at the earliest stage of our life. This happens already in infancy, when a 3-4 month old child, for the first time in life, consciously and intentionally opens the mouth not to eat, but to speak to oneself, and not to a caregiver with the help of a seemingly clumsy cooing. And this is not a clumsy act at all, because with this cooing, this child gains an independence in breaking the unbearable, monotonous brain emission, electromagnetic brain emission felt as the anxiety. If such an infant were connected to an EEG recorder, we would notice how the alpha waves, which are a record of the modern form of the anxiety, begin to accelerate in frequency and increase in amplitude, turning into beta waves. That's the waves that are the records of the symbolic brain emission activity. I said above that alpha waves are a record of the modern form of the anxiety. Does this mean that we deal with various forms of the anxiety throughout the history? Most likely we do, for if the symbolic activity of the brain undergoes constant development over the course of evolution and even bigger advancement, this is what evolution is all about, then the anxiety of the primitive man must be different, which is the anxiety cohabitating with the barely residual symbolic activity of the brain, compared to the anxiety of the modern man, whose anxiety cohabits with the incredibly rich, almost incessant symbolic activity of the brain. The anxiety and the symbolic activity are the results of the same brain electromagnetic wave emissions, so necessarily they interact with each other. Therefore, alpha waves are not a record of the primal, pure anxiety that we might have registered 20 million years ago in the pre-human apes, if there had been such a possibility then. We know, however, that alpha waves are most likely related to the phenomenon of the anxiety brain waves emissions. We know it from only a few characteristics of these waves in which the most primitive nature of the anxiety survived. Before it was increasingly symbolized by the symbolic brain emissions in the course of the evolution. What are the features from which we can conclude that these are alpha waves that are closest to the anxiety as its graphic representation? These are the appearance of the alpha waves when we close our eyes, their appearance just before falling asleep, and immediately after waking up. As we can see, these are short moments when the symbolic activity of the brain is no longer active, and then we are dealing with the record of the purest form of the anxiety. However, these moments are shorter than we might imagine, fraction of a second. For while in the pre-human apes, the dominant form of the brain activity was the anxiety emission, in modern man, the symbolic activity of the brain dominated the anxiety activity. Therefore, it's justified to state that under the normal conditions, a pure anxiety in the EEG recording is very rare and only in episodes of seconds.